All right, let's talk about the ITTOs. First, the inputs. There are 6 in the list. The first one is project management plan. There are 7 components that are part of project management plan are used as inputs in conduct procurements. Let's look at them. First, scope management plan. The scope management plan describes how overall scope of the work will be managed, including the scope performed by sellers. Requirements management plan. The requirements management plan includes how sellers will manage the requirements. The next one is communication management plan. The communication management plan describes how communication between buyers and sellers will be conducted. Risk management plan. The risk management plan describes how risk management activities will be structured and performed that are related to procurement. Procurement management plan. The procurement management plan contains the activities to be undertaken during the conduct procurement process. Configuration management plan. The configuration management plan has the list of items that are configurable and the formal change control process. This information will be helpful to control and manage the project scope. It includes process for sellers configuration management. The last one is cost baseline. The cost baseline includes the budget for the procurement as well as cost associated with managing the procurement process and sellers. The next one is project documents. There are 4 project documents that are used as inputs. First, lessons learned register. The lessons learned from previous project with regard to conducting procurements can be applied to improve the efficiency of this process. Project schedule. The project schedule identifies the start and the end dates of the project activities, including procurement activities. It also defines when contract deliverables are due. Requirements documentation. Here, requirement documentation may include technical requirements that the seller is required to satisfy, requirements with the contractual and legal implications, including health, safety, security, performance, environmental, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunities, license and permits, etc. The next one is risk register. Each approved sellers come with their own unique set of risks depending on the seller's organization. It varies depending on the duration of the contract, the external environment, the project delivery method, the type of contracts vehicle chosen, and the final agreed upon price. The last one is stakeholder register. This document contains all the details about identified stakeholders related to procurement and procurement process. The third input is procurement documentation. Bids document. RFI, RFP, RFQ are some of the documents that are sent to the sellers to develop bid response. Independent cost estimates. The seller submits their bid with their cost details. Unless the buyer has a rough idea on what will be the likely cost, he may not be able to make a right decision. So, typically, the buyer also does a cost estimation so that he can compare his estimation with sellers. In case the variation is very high, then he can go back and understand what went wrong in his cost estimate or what is not considered in seller's estimation. This cost estimation by the buyer can be done by internal SMEs or it can be outsourced. Procurement statement of work. The procurement statement of work SOW provides the goals, requirements, and the expected outcome to the seller. The sellers are expected to share the documents in the common format framed by buyers so that the most eligible sellers can be selected by comparing. Source selection criteria. These criteria describe how bidder proposals will be evaluated, including evaluation criteria and weightage for each criteria. It can also happen that to mitigate the risk, the buyer may sign agreement with more than one seller. The fourth input is seller's proposal. Seller proposal is a response to bid documents sent by buyer. It's a good practice to separate the technical proposal from the price proposal. From the buyer side, the evaluation body reviews each submitted proposal according to the source selection criteria. The fifth input is enterprise environmental factors. Here, contract management system, external economic environment constraining procurement process, law and regulations regarding procurement. In case of international procurement, then the international law and regulations can be applicable. Market conditions describing what products, service, and results that are available in the regional and global markets. Information on relevant past experience with sellers, both good and bad. Prior agreements already in place, or some of the enterprise environmental factors to be considered as inputs. The sixth input is organizational process asserts. Financial policies and procedures regarding invoicing and payment process, list of preferred sellers that have been pre-qualified, organization policies that influences the selection of a seller, specific organizational templates or guidelines that will determine the way agreements are drafted and built, or some of the organizational process asserts that are used as inputs. Now, tools and techniques. There are 5 in the list. First, expert judgment. For this process, the experts can be from proposal evaluation, technical expert, relevant functional areas such as financing, engineering, design, development, supply chain management, etc., industry regulatory environment, laws, regulations, and compliance requirements, negotiation. The next one is advertising. First, overview. Advertising doesn't need any introduction, right? To notify and invite the seller, advertisement may be placed in newspapers, magazines, online portals, selected newspapers, domain-specific magazines, specialty trade publications, or any other type of media where the seller have access to. The need of seller could be announced even in the company's website, through media press release or professional associations, or through free online advertisements as well. Communication is done to communicate with the sellers or potential sellers about the specific product, service, or result. In fact, in many countries, for the government project, it's mandatory that advertisement should be placed in the above discussed public forum. Now, advertisements in context. You notify and invite the sellers to deliver the product, service, or result. It could be a portion or for a complete module. The third input is bidders conference. Bidder conference, also called contractor conference, vendor conference, and pre-bid conference. It's a meeting between the buyer and the prospective seller prior to proposal submission. This is done to ensure that all prospective bidders have a clear and common understanding of the procurement and no bidders receive preferential treatment. During the conference, they can tour the buyer's facility, if it's relevant to the project, of course, or attend forum and ask questions about the procurement. The questions asked during the bidder conference, along with the buyer's response, are documented and sent to all prospective bidders to make sure that all of them have same information. The questions and answers asked during the bidder conference also added to the bidder document as addenda. The bidder conference is also an opportunity for the buyer to discover anything missing in the bid document. Even though it's a procurement department's activity, it's a good practice for the project manager to attend the bidder conference. There are few things the project manager needs to watch out in the bidder conference, such as collusion. Seller is not asking question in front of the competition. Making sure all questions and answers are put in writing and issued to all potential sellers by the buyer as addenda to the bid documents. This is to ensure that all the sellers are responding to the same procurement statement of work. The next one is data analysis. Here it's proposal evaluation. Proposal evaluation is all about evaluating the document for their completeness. The document could be procurement statement of work, source selection criteria, bid documents, or other documents that are part of bid package. Let's look at the steps involved in seller selection. After receiving the proposal from the seller, the buyer screens them to eliminate sellers who do not meet the minimum requirements of the source selection criteria. Then, the buyer assesses the ability and willingness to provide the requested products or services. There could be multiple sellers who are willing to provide the products or service. In that case, the buyer needs to negotiate with all the potential sellers. The final selection of seller may depend on the negotiated cost, delivery time, quality standards, etc. It totally depends on the project and the organization. The contract may be awarded to one or more sellers to reduce the risk. Apart from negotiation, at times the buyer may ask the seller to make presentation as well before shortlisting the final list of vendors for negotiation or after negotiation, but before finalizing the vendor. These methods are completely depends on the type of project, type of outsourced product or service, and type of work to be performed. The next one is interpersonal and team skills. Here it's negotiation. The negotiation should lead by the member of the procurement team who has the authority to sign the contract, which is very important. The project manager and other members of the project management team may be present during negotiation to provide assistance as needed. All right, now let's talk about the outputs. Selected sellers. After the evaluation of response with selected sellers or with all the sellers, negotiation gets conducted. At times, the seller is asked to give presentation as a screening process. This is something we discussed earlier. As an outcome of this process, one or multiple sellers are selected and the contract is awarded. This means that the buyer and the seller have agreed and signed off to all terms and conditions of the contract. Then they will move forward to create the product or service. Typically, the senior management approval is required before awarding the contract to the seller when the procurement have higher value or high risk or complex deliverables. Now, next thing is agreements. A contract is a mutually binding document that obligates the seller to provide the specified product, service, or result. Obligates the buyer to compensate the seller. Agreement represents the legal relationship that is subject to remedy in the court. As an output of conduct procurement process, the agreement document will include procurement statement of work, major deliverables, schedule milestones, performance reporting, price and payment terms, inspection, quality and acceptance criteria, warranty and future product support, incentives and penalties, insurance and performance bonds, subordinate subcontractors approval, general terms and conditions, change request handling, and termination clause and alternative dispute resolution mechanism. The next output is change request. Change can arise as a part of conduct procurement. The changes can impact project management plan, its subsidiary plan, and other components. All changes should follow perform integrated change control process. The next one is project management plan updates. There are 7 components. Let's look at those. Requirements management plan. There may be changes to project requirements due to change identified by sellers. Quality management plan. Sellers may offer alternative quality standards or alternative solution that impacts the quality approach defined in the quality management plan. In those cases, if the quality can be achieved without any compromise, then the quality management plan needs to be updated with the alternative solutions. Communication management plan. As the new sellers get into the project, the communication management plan is updated to incorporate their communication needs and approaches. Risk management plan. Each agreement and the sellers have their own set of risk. This needs to be updated in risk management plan. Specific risks do not incorporate it into the risk register. Procurement management plan. Updates may be required depending on the results of the contracting and negotiation process. Scope baseline. The project WBS and deliverables documented in the scope baseline and considered when performing procurement activities. Anyone or all of these may change during the procurement process. If the delivery change is created by the seller that impacts overall project schedule performance, then the baseline schedule may need to be updated and approved to reflect the current expectations. Cost baseline. Contractors and material price may fluctuate during the delivery of a project. These changes can occur because of fluctuating material and labor price due to external economic environment. this to be incorporated into the cost baseline. Changes from the planned approach can bring in change in cost. Now let's discuss about project documents updates. Lessons learned register. The lessons learned register is updated with information on changes encountered while conducting procurements and how they could have been avoided, as well as approaches that worked well. Requirements documentation. Upon completion of conduct procurements as output, some of the documents may be updated, such as technical requirements that the seller is required to satisfy, requirements with the contractual and legal implications. The next one is requirements traceability matrix. As the sellers are incorporated into the project plan, the requirements register and the traceability matrix may be updated depending on the capabilities of specific seller. Resource calendars. Availability of seller is updated in resource calendar as the outcome of conduct procurement. A risk register. Each approved seller will have their own list of risk. Any change made during the contract process may introduce new risk and maybe changes to the existing risk. All this information should reflect in risk register against each seller. Stakeholder register. As an output of conduct procurements, the agreements made with the sellers are updated. The last output is organizational process asserts updates. List of prospective and pre-qualified sellers, information about experience with sellers, both good and bad, are updated. All right, that wraps up the ITTO. Let's move to the next process.